How's it going, YouTube? Welcome to the Martian Report. And in this one, I'm going to be getting into a debate with Mike Malone on a very controversial subject for most Americans. Mike, what is the conversation of this debate?
Coronavirus could pave the way to a universal basic income.
That is exactly right, Mike. That is exactly what we're going to be debating today. And, well, first, let's hear what Mike has to say. What you have to say, Mike, about this virus, or about this this potential of a universal basic income.
Somebody needs to tell me how this is going to work. I need an economic explanation of how this is actually going to create more prosperity and how it isn't going to just cause a huge wealth transfer, especially, they use these things.
Well, hold on, let me cut you off there, Mike. So I think that's actually exactly the point. The idea of a universal basic income is that we as a society, as Americans, have gone so far down the route of giving the corporations all of our money. They've robbed you and I, Mike, as human beings, these corporate people, not any one individual working at the corporation, but the corporate person as they are legally declared, have robbed you and me. And what the idea of a universal basic income is that we apply a tax to this specific group of individuals, this specific class of humans, this corporate class, and through a tax on them, we afford flesh and blood humans the ability to feed themselves and participate within the market. But you're saying about these things?
As a cover to also transfer wealth, all these bailouts, a lot of wealth is going to be transferred to big companies and the big banks.
Actually, no, Mike, that's not all what would happen with universal basic income. Now, that is traditionally what happens with a bailout. A bailout is almost universally, historically speaking, been to the big banks, to the big companies, to give them a leg up on all of their competitors, their small business competitors. But what a universal basic income does is that democratizes the financial means to the individual so that they can decide whether they want to bail out Walmart by buying Walmart products, bail out Amazon by buying everything on Amazon, or if they want to use their newfound financial freedom to go and fund, say, a local business, a competitor to Amazon or to Walmart, who is run by, say, their family friend. And maybe they don't want to go eat at McDonald's. They want to go eat at their best friend's restaurant. But their best friend's restaurant's a little more expensive than McDonald's because, unlike McDonald's, they haven't received hundreds of billions of dollars in bailouts or in corporate subsidized funding because they're too big of an industry to fail. And what this does is it actually enables you and me, Mike, to decide who actually deserves to survive in the economy, who it is that is providing the greatest benefit to you and I, instead of leaving it in the hands of big government to determine who it is that deserves to survive in an economic crisis such as we're facing right now. Anyways, financial institutions?
The financial sector in this crisis, and it's stolen from the average person. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to steal from everybody.
Wait. So you're implying that universal basic income is stealing from everybody. That just doesn't make sense, Mike. Because universal basic income, as I laid out a little bit ago, is simply us taking money from corporations. It's Robin Hood. It's taking from the rich and giving to the poor. Now, I know that's not a very fancy thing or a very in-fashion thing to do in a capitalist society, but when capitalism has gotten so top-heavy that the bottom 50% can't afford to feed themselves, well, drastic times call for drastic measures. And I don't like that you're implying to your viewers, to our viewers right now, that universal basic income is stealing from everybody, because that just doesn't make sense. if I'm receiving $2,000 from my government every single month, how is my government stealing from me? If I'm receiving $2,000 because Amazon has automated away hundreds of thousands of jobs and those robots are still increasing Amazon's productivity, and therefore that productivity fee that the government is charging into my bank account, how is that stealing from you or me to give you or me $2,000 a month at the cost of Amazon not being able to just write off 100% of the previous employee's income that they've now transferred to a robot that costs just the electricity to run that and the minimal maintenance costs comparative to the 50 to 100 employees that one maintenance man who maintains that robot is now being paid. It just, that just doesn't make sense. But you seem to have a train of thought here, right? What do you have to say further?
Anyway, this guy standing, a research professor in development studies, so at least he's not in economics, University of London, said that there was no prospect of a global economic revival without a universal basic income. I just want to know where it works.
So this is where it works. I kind of already laid those out, but again, we have a very top-heavy system right now, and the only way that we survive as a society going forward is if we enable the disenfranchised, the impoverished, to participate within the economy. Now, as I'm sure you're well aware, Mike, right now, economic activity has slowed to a near halt. And that's because everybody's afraid of whether or not they're going to have the money to even buy food next month, let alone to go buying new clothes or put a down payment on a car or a new home. And so by providing a universal basic income, you actually are providing Americans the ability to jumpstart your economy again, to get velocity of money, as I know you love to talk about, flowing through the system again. And that's obviously good for the economy. Velocity of money is critical in ensuring the value of the dollar. As anybody who is actually in my community in the cryptocurrency knows, one of the primary reasons why our ecosystem is so illiquid, the value is staying so low, is because there's such low volume compared to the volume that flows through, say, the US dollar or any other G20 currency.
How it works.
Yeah,
that's exactly how it works. The International Monetary Fund expects the global economy to suffer its worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. Actually, they are behind the curve. One day they will be admitting that this is the worst financial crisis in history.
I completely agree. This is the worst financial crisis in history. It's actually far worse than I think you'd be willing to admit, Mike, because you like to seem like a relatively serious, stable individual who doesn't go off the rails too much. But I 100% agree. This is the most serious financial crisis we have ever faced.
Bar none. It doesn't matter how far back you go or in any society. There's no time where the entire world was so invested in paper assets, and those assets blown into bubbles by the world's central banks, and then you unleash. I mean, you could go back to the Black Plague, and the economic effects pale in comparison to what is going to happen here.
Well, to be fair, Mike, the reason why the Black Plague had such a minuscule economic impact, and it was actually pretty severe, but the reason why the Black Plague was so minuscule is because as a whole, the global economy was fractured. There was no such thing as globalism then, because that was essentially at the bottom of the decay of the Roman Empire, as most of all of Europe was in what we now know as the Dark Ages, but you're right. The economic impact of the Black Plague, because the economy of the nations or kingdoms who were around back then was already in the toilet. So yeah, it's serious, very serious times we live in, and I don't think most people are really up to the task of computing just how serious this crisis is. I do appreciate your content, though, and the fact that you are continually covering this and bringing to people's awareness, very serious people's awareness, just how serious this crisis is.
In his Easter letter over the weekend, Pope Francis said that this may be the time to consider a universal basic wage. And we've already gone down this road in the United States. We've sent everybody $1,200. There's a bill that's going to be presented to Congress to send everybody $2,000 a month until this crisis is over. And I just want to know how that is going to work.
Well, I don't know. I guess you received your $1,200 check, and I know a lot of people in my community have received their $1,200 check, but I personally haven't. And that speaks to how non-universal that first $1,200 was. But if this bill that's in Congress actually passes, I have my, despite my desire for such a bill to pass, I really am skeptical that such will. It was actually in the act prior to the passing of the CARES Act. It was one of the things that was cut from it, and it was put in its own bill, its own separate bill. And typically when Congress does such a thing, it's because they don't want that passed in the first place. And so I don't see it as actually being passed unless the United States government feels that it is between a rock and a hard place where it has literally no option, because as I laid out earlier, it's actually to the detriment, the financial detriment of big business to allow such a thing, because it is giving power to the consumer to determine who gets to survive in this crisis and who goes under. And there's a very real potential that many consumers may choose to go and fund a mom and pop shop, especially in small town America, over going and buying from Walmart or Amazon. And so to many of these big corporations who own the politicians in Washington, let's be completely frank, that's a risk that many of them would not like to take. Now, obviously, there are many out there, such as Jeff Bezos and Sergio over at Alphabet and Elon Musk, who would like to take that bet, who feel that not only could they potentially benefit from such, but that it's actually necessary for the economy and society to survive at all. And actually, if you listen to individuals like Elon Musk, he was proposing that this is actually a necessity going forward for the global economy to survive. All the way back to 2010, 2011, Elon Musk was proposing this. Sergio as well, actually. I believe that Sergio did a Google talk where he said that this was necessary, I think in 2012. Don't quote me on that, but I'll do a video on that actually at some point in the future, where I'll go and dig back all these videos of all these big time founders and CEOs of these $100 billion, trillion companies saying just this.
Earlier this month, Spain's Minister for Economic Affairs said that the Eurozone's fourth largest economy would roll out a universal basic income as soon as possible. So they're just going to do it. And he said that the government's wish is to make it a nationwide basic wage a permanent instrument that supports its citizens forever.
Isn't that great for Spain? I mean, if only the richest nation in the whole world could afford to do such a thing. I mean, obviously only, what term would you use for a single European country that, is still first world, but a peripheral nation of the first world economy to actually engage in giving its citizens a assured basic income, a assured net income, which they can then build upon with a job. $2,000 a month in America, yeah, that's nice. That's $24,000 a year. Most Americans are not accustomed to a $24,000 a year lifestyle. Even those working Walmart are not accustomed to that minimal of a value lifestyle. And so most everybody, even with $2,000 a month, is still going to go and seek a side job. Even, many people may actually choose to go try and start up their own business with these funds, likely fail, but that's the unfortunate reality. Most business ventures do fail, but that would still be injecting money into multiple facets of the economy that would otherwise not receive the capital from such startups, because no bank is going to fund an average Joe to go pursue their career, their business venture, because it's a vision that no bank can see. And that's actually the sad reality for a lot of would-be entrepreneurs. So in many ways, a universal basic wage, a universal basic income is brilliant. And well, I'll let you talk a little bit more about your views on this.
Somebody please explain to me how this is going to work. The true wealth is from you and me creating a product or a service for each other and then trading that product or service. And we use a medium of exchange to do it, which is nothing but a measurement tool. You can put a price on something, and a temporary storage device for that value that the true wealth had, the goods and services that we exchanged. If I've got currency and I pay you for something that you sell me, the value of what you sold me is temporarily stored in that currency, and then you're going to take that currency and buy something else of value that you want or need, and the value to you will be equal to the value that you sold to what I valued your product or service at.
So let me explain this, because you seem to be stuck in, not trying to be ageist here, you are a bit older though, Mike, and let's be real, your thinking is stuck in 1960, 1970s, prior to the true automation revolution, which has essentially wiped out most all human labor when it comes to manufacturing and production of goods. To be completely clear, over 70% of all human labor within the American economy prior to this economic crisis is in the service industry, not in the production industry. And this is actually true of most all developed nations. Now, developing nations such as China, such as Malaysia, where I'm currently at, they do rely upon production to create value within their economies. However, when you as a producing nation are no longer able to sell your goods to a nation such as America, because the American consumer no longer has the financial means to consume, that dramatically devalues the cost of those developing nations' goods, because now they have a surplus of their goods and they can't turn a profit on the wages that their employees are paid for the good that they were previously selling to an extremely wealthy first world nation at first world costs. And so this results in the layoffs of those third world or those developing nations citizens from their jobs. So really what we are doing by implementing a universal basic income in America is not just helping the first world nationer maintain a standard of living where we consume and continue to fuel the globalized economy which we live in, but you're also helping support and improve the value purchasing power of a developing nation. You see, something that I'm sure you're well aware of, and I'll actually wait till you get into this conversation because I know you want to talk about the devaluation of currency here in a bit. But the ideas that you're presenting are rooted in an old economy, in an economy where production was done by or goods were produced primarily by humans. But that's just not the world we live in now, Mike. And you need to really evolve your thinking and adapt to the modern economy, to the modern world we live in, and how things are actually produced. Because what you are presenting is 100% factual if we were still in 1980s. prior to automation sweeping the world, sweeping especially first world nations like America. And the things that we cannot produce in America, that robots cannot produce, we've exported to developing nations. And that's why I laid out that little narrative there for you for how developing nations actually profit or benefit from us going on to this. But we'll get into that a little bit later.
They're creating more digits, and they're adding these digits to people's bank accounts. And those digits are the measurement tool. And what happens is they add it to the bank account, and this is an empty digit that has no value whatsoever. It gets its value the moment that it's spent into circulation. And once it's spent into circulation, it dilutes the pool of digits, stealing value from all of the other digits and transferring. That's where it gets its purchasing power. Stolen purchasing power. It's theft. And so we're all going to steal from each other. And that's supposed to make us all richer and keep things from getting worse.
Actually, that is, so there's nuance to what you've just said, Mike. And I'm going to credit you that there is some truth to what you've just said. However, what you have just failed to acknowledge is, again, what I just laid out, that we live in a very complex, globalized economy, in a world where there's not just the dollar. The dollar is the global reserve currency. And this is actually something very important to consider when we're talking about not just universal basic income for a country like Spain, but that utilizes the euro, which is a global reserve currency, but it's not the reserve currency, right? It's just one of the basket, one in the basket. Now, what you need to keep in mind is that for the global reserve currency to properly function, it actually needs to preserve value. Now, this is an issue. I'm saying this because this is an issue that would be unique to Americans to face should we implement universal basic income. But it's not actually an issue for what you're presenting, the reason you're presenting. It's an issue in that what this will do is essentially perform the exact opposite function the world wants the dollar to perform for their currencies, or for their nation's economies to continue being the producers that they are, and would actually create a competitive production purchasing power for the American economy. In other words, to put that in plain English, by devaluing the dollar, we actually increase the demand for American labor. And so this actually would draw more jobs back to America by devaluing the dollar. Now, many nations are producing nations like China will, over years, over literally decades that this would take to play out, would eventually begin to have to compete with newly emerging American labor, assuming that automation does not completely eliminate human production from the equation within this 10 to 20 year period this would play out. And if you follow technology trends, this is actually how things are going to play out. The only jobs left for humans by even conservative engineering standpoints, and I'm talking about production, not service industries, is about 15 years from now, 2035. The most conservative projected to be 2040. And by implementing universal basic income, it would easily be 2050 before the American dollar would be devalued so much so that American labor would be competitive with Chinese labor, with Malaysian labor. Chinese labor before Malaysian labor, because the value of their respective economies. However, the idea is that as we progress down this chain, countries such as China would be able to then implement universal basic income for their citizens, and then their production would have to be exported to say, India. Now, India is in a very similar position to China, so I know it's a bad example. But eventually, this means production would be shipped to African nations, and they would become developing nations, as opposed to third world, impoverished nations or underdeveloped nations. And this means that as a global community, we would be progressing and bringing everyone up, as opposed to, this is essentially a global trickle-down economy in this regard. Only instead of the funds that we're doing right now going to the world's elites, they would go to the wealthiest nations, who would then fund the poorer nations to be lifted up out of poverty and to be giving jobs, of the few remaining jobs in production, to these nations until automation takes over and we can provide a UBI to every human being on the planet. And then every human being is being paid for the production being performed by robots. And I don't know if you know, Mike, but robots, they don't need to eat. They don't need to send their children to school. So why are you I wish that I could ask you why you're supporting, robot overlords as opposed to your fellow human being. But unfortunately, you're obviously not here in this debate with me. We're just going over one of your videos where you are presenting a lot of outdated ideas. So please do continue. It's been a little while since I allowed you to talk.
But if the true wealth is the goods and services that we create for one another, how does typing digit create more units of goods and services? Well,
the reality is we don't need to do that, as I just laid out. But continue. Move on to your next point.
Wealth is constantly produced and consumed, created and consumed. We grow food and then we eat it. We build a car and then we drive it until it goes to the junkyard. We make clothes, and then we wear them until we donate them or throw them out or whatever. Wealth is constantly being created and consumed. Well, you're going to see in some of the next stories here.
Yes, but as I just laid out again, humans are not making a lot of clothing now. A lot of it's done by a automated loom. Now, there are still a lot of places in third world nations where clothing is there's still a large portion of the fabrication, the textile industry, where human labor is involved. But even in third world nations, second world nations, such as here in Malaysia and in China, they are being assisted more and more day by day by robotics, by automated machinery. And that enables that one individual to perform the work that 100 or 1,000 humans did just 20 years ago. And that's Moore's law. That is a function of Moore's law. Anyways, I don't want to go into my previous tangent again. We'll let you move on to your new topic.
Suddenly the creation has gone away. So there's much less creation. All of the manufacturing is dropping, retail sales is dropping, wealth creation is falling off of a cliff. They're going to create more of these fiat units of the medium of exchange and dilute that pool of measurement devices and units of exchange while the wealth is falling. This is a recipe for disaster. It cannot end well.
Well, where we're going right now, it's not going to end well. And the reality is the chances of politicians who are owned by incumbent corporations who do not really stand to benefit from a universal basic income, the chances of said bought and owned politicians actually passing this bill, which you're so terrified of passing, don't worry, Mike. I'm fully confident it will not pass. And if it does, it's going to be short-lived. It is only going to be for 3 to 6 months, and that'll be that. So, and such a thing would not cause hyperinflation over a 6-month period. We just finished printing $6 trillion for Wall Street, for big financials, so they can loan out to their buddies. And that money will get into the economy. It will flow into the economy. It's already flowing into the economy, into the stock market. And the stock market's inflating. The values are going up despite nobody having a job, despite 50% of Americans now being unemployed, over 50% if you follow the real metrics, as that being the 32% of Americans, well, 36% of Americans who were disenfranchised workers, individuals who gave up on looking for work, who were already on welfare or Social Security or just being homeless prior to the crash that we are now experiencing. And then you tack on the 18% of the labor force that has now been dropped due to, the 25.6 million Americans that have been unemployed in the last 5 weeks. You have over half of Americans not working today. And so that's half of Americans who cannot go and buy a good, a service. And because they cannot go and buy a good or service, nobody is making the goods and services. The reason farmers are not having issues growing crops, they're having issues finding buyers for their crops. And so you can now go online and see farmers plowing their crops under because there's nobody to buy them, because nobody has the money to afford them. It's not an issue of production, it's an issue of consumption. We don't have a supply shock, we have a demand shock, because everybody is now, again, hyperbole here, but everybody's now unemployed, everybody's now sitting at home, nobody wants to go out, nobody wants to risk getting the virus, and so there is no economy. Nobody is purchasing. Everybody is sitting on their wallets, wondering how long they can survive on the little bit of money that they have. And that is why we're watching the government even propose this, the most capitalist nation in the world, even propose such a policy. It's not because it's insanity, it's because it's a necessity. We have to move the American people out of a mindset of scarcity and into a mindset of prosperity, into a mindset of abundance. That is the only way we can get Americans and get the world to begin purchasing again so that they can jumpstart the economy and get the ball rolling again. Enable farmers to have somebody to buy their goods off them, because again, there's not an issue of production. Production is stopped because there's nobody to buy the oil on the shores, and so the tankers are dropping anchor, waiting for the oil tanks to empty out, somebody to go buy gasoline so that they can drain an oil tank so that they can move the pipeline down. It's not because there's no oil manufacturers anymore. The oil manufacturers have bottlenecked at the consumer. That's the issue, Mike.
There's no way that this can work. I want somebody to show me how the economics of modern monetary theory, the Maduro-Mugabe theory, or the magic money tree, how this universal basic income works.
Well, I think that I laid that out pretty thoroughly at this point, Mike, and I'd really enjoy if you would actually have a real world debate with me, because obviously this is a little disingenuous. I have to sit here and take a few minutes clip of you ranting and raving about how you don't understand modern economics and how humans are not responsible for a large majority of production in the in the global economy even anymore, especially the American economy. And it would be awesome if my viewers who actually enjoyed this little pseudo debate would, especially if you are a fan of Mike Maloney also, would reach out to Mike and say, hey Mike, you should debate Jade Martian on his show or on yours. And I would gladly meet with Mike and discuss this platform with him, because he seems to genuinely not understand how universal basic income operates. And I think that a lot of people out there in my community and elsewhere just don't understand how the economics of this work and how it's actually a solution to the corner that we as a society, as a global economy, have the corner we painted ourselves into. It's actually a way for us to get out of this. The easiest way to kill a monster is to make a new monster. And the monster right now is corporations, bloated, highly monopolized corporations. And those corporations are cornering the consumer and have taken away all of our abilities to survive without them. And so we're now, but the issue is that corporation, previously, before it became the monster that it is now, relied upon us to feed it. But it's cornered us now, and we don't have any food left to give it. So it's going to either consume us and then starve to death, or we're going to give ourselves an injection, the same injection that we've been giving that monster for the last 70 years, turn ourselves into a monster, and then we can wrestle. Or we can shove that monster out of the way and be like, dude, here's the food, you fucking idiot. Right? So again, to anybody who enjoyed this video, please be sure to hit that like, give me a subscribe if you're new, and be sure to reach out to Mike Maloney and let him know that I would love to have an actual debate with him. And in the meantime, I'm going to do a few more of these because there's a lot of people in the traditional sector, I guess, these traditional gold bugs who have a lot of outdated ideas that I'm going to go and address and debate and debunk. So I will see all of you in my next video, as always, on Mars.